Hello, hello, welcome, please come in. We continue our heavy equipload journey here today in Elden Ring, the final game in our series. Start by choosing Vagabond. Pasef, what are you doing? Yes, the keyboard is very fun. Alright. Then create our Strunk with her trademark green skin. I chose Vagabond, both because it starts with high stats in the areas I want them, and also that Vagabond is actually the only class that starts in heavy equipload already. So that is the class I need to go with. I choose the Golden Seed as the starting gift. My flasks are going to be a bit under max because I will be doing the minimum side nonsense as possible, so a bonus Golden Seed is always very helpful. First objective is to die, then over to this side of Grace to have a chat with Melina to get Torrent. Nice advantage of Elden Ring is that horse doesn't care how heavy I am. Pick up the regular whetstone, then kill this Scarab Beetle because it's on the way. Determination? Didn't realize that's what that was. That's going to be very, very useful. Then to this church for the Wondrous Physic and a Sacred Tear, and into Fort Height to fight this Blood Knight, who almost kills me because a rat comes to his aid. Fortunately, that is not what happens. This gives me a Blood Ash of War and the first half of the Dectus Medallion. Into Caelid, my first stop is this broken cart, which has the biggest sword in it, because much like Dark Souls 2, I want big sword. Melina takes me to the Round Table Hold, but I have other places to be. That's right, it's time to run through Fort Faroth to pick up the other Dectus Medallion, and a Golden Root 10, and Radagon Soreseal. And then some more frantic running through Caelid, and then into Redmane Castle. Here I can pick up the Fire Wet Blade. This lets me infuse weapons with fire damage, which is a very useful type against the main bosses of this game, and scales with strength, for some reason. Now back to Fort Faroth for some Dragon Feet, and by that I mean attacking for just so long with my Bleed Sword. And then pop the Golden Falfoot I picked up earlier to get almost 100,000 runes, which goes into Strength, Endurance, and Vitality, so I can fully use Big Sword. And we're almost done with the first batch of running around, but I do need to stop by Bernal to pick up the No Skill Ash of War so that I can still use my main weapon skill with a shield out. And back to Round Table Hold very briefly to upgrade my Greatsword to +1. And to Kael for the crafting kit and a torch. And to this merchant for some smithing stones and a bow and some arrows. Burn a rune to get my greatsword up to +2, and now it's time to face down the first boss, Margit. And I already forgot to equip No Skill. But then I get knocked off the cliff. Back into the fight. Still without No Skill equipped on the shield, but that's fine. Determination's 60% damage bonus on an attack is great, and will be used for most of the playthrough, but it's not essential here, especially since the runes from Grey all by themselves make me over-leveled. First boss down, many more to go. First boss dead, and it's time for more running around. First stop is the Mad Pumpkinhead, who dies very quickly. This unlocks Selin. I don't care about most of her spells, but I do pick up Scholar's Shield, then kill this nearby noble for a Glintstone Staff. I don't have the intelligence to use either yet, but I will very soon. Then Nereus finds out why Determination is so good. Then Patches finds out why Big Sword is so scary. I can buy 3 gold feet from him and the recipe for me to craft more. And bonus runes is always good. Time to cross off a bunch of objectives in the Weeping Peninsula. This gets me some smithing stones, some sacred tears, and some nice souls from dead bosses. This gets my greatsword up to +4, which means it's time to head back into Limgrave Castle. I like to take the main route through the front gate, which isn't normally too difficult, but not being able to roll through attacks does make it more interesting. Not that much more interesting, though. And by heading through the optional areas, I can pick up the Manor Tower Shield, my first great shield in the game. Because yes, my strategy is going to be Big Sword and Big Shield. But my stamina regen is slow, so time to pick up a Turtle Talisman, and it's boss time. I have, once again, forgotten to equip No Skill on a shield, so using Determination in this fight is trickier than it needed to be. I also don't have the guard boost to block all of his big combo moves. The good news is that I can effectively block basically anything else. And while Godric's attacks are very showy, they aren't actually that dangerous once you know what you're doing. Runes from the boss, combined with popping his Remembrance, gets my intelligence up to +12, which means I can equip the Demi-Human Staff from Weeping, and Scholar's Shield. This provides 30% additional damage resistance, and a 35% reduction to stamina cost to block. And to test it out, I'm gonna head through Castle Morn. Let's see how all this defense stands up to the Leonin. Its attacks bounce off my shield? That's amazing. Well, time to head back through Limgrave Castle to now reach Liurnia, and immediately warp back to Caelid for more errands. First is to pick up Flame Grant Me Strength, which grants a bonus to physical and fire damage. Too bad I completely forgot it exists, and will never actually use it in this playthrough. I then try to get the Golden Scarab, but keep getting rotted. A smart person would just buy a few healing boluses. Instead, I decide I'm going to go on a long side quest to get Flame Cleanse Me, which isn't helped by not fully remembering where that actually is. So I'm gonna gloss over this nonsense fiesta and just say that I get a seal and Flame Cleanse Me and went back into the cave to easily kill these Clean Rot Knights to get the Golden Scarab. Nothing interesting happened, and I don't need to go through it one item at a time. That nonsense fiesta done, it's time to head through Liurnia properly, which means picking up the Academy Glintstone Key. And while I don't have to fight this dragon, I do like to hit things with the big sword. Iji sells Somber Stones, which would normally be useful, but sadly Big Sword is a normal weapon. I do appreciate the huge magic resistance that Scholar Shield gives me. I'm expecting that to do good work in this all magic all the time zone. And first on my fight list is the Red Wolf of Radagon. And wow, this fight is easy. High Guard plus Scholar Shield means none of its attacks deal significant damage, and my Big Sword deals, frankly, comical amounts of damage. So it's time for Rennala. Phase 1 goes as ever. I almost 2-cycle her, but just come up short. That finished, and it's Phase 2 time, which is actually the first big challenge of the run, which is a novel experience. Rennala is usually a pretty easy boss to deal with. And initially, it really is. And then she starts summoning things, and it quickly turns very, very bad. The summons aren't really worth fighting as they disappear after a short time, and she can always just re-summon them. So the best way to deal with them is always just to run and dodge around them to get to Rennala, which is the first problem. Dodging is the one thing I'm bad at, which means evading attacks while getting to her is pretty tricky. My shield can block a lot of magic damage when buffed, but Scholar Shield has a duration, and without that, I can take a lot of magic damage very quickly. Also, Rennala moves a lot more than I really remembered. The movements are pretty slow and floaty, so it's not something I usually have to worry about. But when I'm trying to dodge all her magic and summon nonsense on top of already having a fairly slow weapon, it gets real rough, real fast. And good lord does she summon way more than I'd like, especially when every time she summons it breaks lock-on and really doesn't want to let me lock back onto her. This may unironically be the most difficult fight in this run. It's just the perfect counter to my heavy equip load nonsense. It takes a few tries, but I finally win by just giving up on regular attacks and focusing mostly on using jumping attacks, combined with determination to boost the damage even more. Okay, was really not expecting Rennala to be that tricky. Probably didn't need to be if I'd switched to something other than Big Sword, but Big Sword. But with Rennala down, I have my 2 great runes and can access the capital. So it's time to take the big lift up to the Altus Plateau. I'd love to take out these tree sentinels to get another big shield, but I think I'm just a bit too weak to make that work. Despite being too weak for that fight, let's see how the draconic tree sentinel fight goes. And the answer is not great. I don't even get the boss down to half health. My damage doesn't look awful, but considering how slow this sword is, my damage is actually pretty bad. And while Scholar Shield boosting my guard helps a lot, it's not quite enough. I think I'm going to need to do some additional running around to get as strong as I need to be for this fight. And that is going to start by getting smithing stones, specifically the smithing stone bell bearings, so I can just buy regular stones. My sword is still pretty unupgraded at this point, and just unlocking the stones I can get now will get me up to a plus 12. First bell bearing is locked behind this crystallion, and the second is just in this unguarded chest. But to actually do those upgrades, I'm going to need some more runes, because this game decided to increase the cost of upgrading weapons based on their weight, which is really annoying, particularly for me. But a brief easy boss kill gets me a plus 12. Oh, I forgot to pick up the extra talisman slot. Back to the draconic tree sentinel, and the damage is better, right? Doesn't actually seem that much better, but it should be good enough. I just need to remember this boss's moveset and follow-up attacks. And, oh right, I'm outside. I can summon Torrent, which is very helpful when I need to heal, and Tree Sentinel won't stop shooting fireballs. It still doesn't save me on this attempt, but I got to phase 2, so I'm making progress. Except next attempt goes worse. Okay, maybe it's time to take a break and do something else. Let's get through Caria Manor. It's optional, but it will give me some nice runes. The run through Caria Manor went fine, and without incident, and it's Loretta time. She isn't nearly as strong as Tree Sentinel, and while she can do magic damage, my magic guard is very high, thanks to Scholar's Shield. This fight does not take very long. And next big source of runes is going to be Radahn. The big issue with Radahn is that while I can guard most of his attacks, he is mobile enough that a few of his combos go through my shield, which is not what I want. I almost take him out on my first attempt, but then he does an attack that bypasses my shield completely. So, fantastic. And second attempt ends way too early as I get a bit greedy fishing for a stagger. Let's see how a third attempt goes. And the answer is mostly okay until phase 2, and then I realize I can't actually block this attack at all, and die. Alright, time for nonsense, because I never said I wouldn't summon help, and I don't actually care about this fight, I just need the runes. So it's time to summon in the help, which honestly is less helpful than I'd hoped, as in my first attempt, they just make it harder for me to tell what attacks Radahn is going to do next. And then final attempt, which goes way better, with Radahn being almost at 20% health before he even flies away. I do have to resummon help, as all my ads are dead, but that done and Scholar's Shield refreshed, that's Radahn dead and 100k runes added to my stock. And while I should put that in Vigor, instead it's going to go to Strength. Big sword. And I may as well run over real quick to activate Godric's Great Rune. A +5 bonus to all stats could be quite useful, especially early on as I'm trying to max out my strength. I still want more runes, so it's time to take out a Putrid Avatar. The avatars are pretty easy since I can block all their physical attacks, though the Putrid variant are more dangerous because I really can't dodge the Scarlet Rot puddles. Thankfully, quickly hopping on Torrent does the work for me. Time to kill some Tree Sentinels. Time to kill some Tree Sentinels. The Shielded Sentinel has a couple attacks I need to be careful around, as they will bypass my guarding, but other than that, it's all about making sure to actually guard at the right time. The Torch Sentinel is both a bit weaker and doesn't have shield slams. This gives me the Erdtree Shield, which is nice against holy damage, but does have the big downside that I can't put no skill on it, which makes using Determination more complicated. Still not quite confident on the Draconic Tree Sentinel fight, so I think it's time to fight Godfroy, just for some runes. And much like Godric, the only attack worth anything is the combo attack, and everything else is blocking attacks and guard countering. Then to take a chest warp to grab the Blessed Dew Talisman. Probably won't be very useful, but any healing at all can be useful when little bits of elemental damage gets past my shields. Okay, enough stalling, time to get back to DTS. My damage has definitely gone up with all the points I put in Strength that I probably should have put in Vigor, because yeah, DTS sure does deal a lot of damage with its lightning attacks in Phase 2. And not being able to effectively dodge means the Call Lightning ability it uses is even more annoying than usual. I mean, sometimes Torn can outrun it, but not always. Okay, new plan, screw the shield, use the horse. Torrent's excellent mobility means I can just ride in, get a hit, ride out. Not a strategy I'd really recommend normally, but my basic attacks deal enough damage with a single hit that it's not too bad. In Phase 2, I do have to make sure to get in close enough that I don't bait out Call Lightning, because dodging that is difficult. But even in this phase, DTS will prioritize nearby attacks more often than not, if you just sweep in fairly frequently. Okay, finally, I can access Leyndell. And it's definitely time to start using the Erdtree Great Shield. That holy damage reduction is going to be very nice. And next boss time. Godfrey, who isn't really notable. He hits pretty hard, but most of his attacks can be effectively blocked, and he just isn't durable enough to stand up to my big sword. Next item on my to-do list is to head down to the sewers below Leyndell, because I don't regret enough things in my life, and I should increase that. So, my goal here is to defeat Sewer Moog, unlocking the path down below Leyndell to the 3 fingers and the best shield in the game. You may then be very confused and surprised to learn that this recording session is not named something like Moog, or 3 Fingers, or several bosses after this, because this shouldn't take a long enough time for an entire recording section. No, this section is called Esgar. And you may be asking, what? Zeph, Esgar is not on the path to Moog at all, and you would be very right about that. I completely forgot the actual path through these stupid tunnels, and ended up dropping down, thinking maybe I misremembered, which ended up with me in this catacomb down here. which I knew was not where I should be, but figured, why not? Since I'm here, I may as well kill the boss for some extra souls. And that was my mistake, because this boss fight sucks, at least for this build. Because hoo boy, does bleed just destroy me. And the fact that Esgar has both 2 Nightmare Dogs and a Reduvia with blood magic, I'd love to say this fight didn't take very long. I'd love to lie, but it took me 40 minutes, and I only won because I bought the beast repelling torch so the dogs wouldn't join the fight. So, I don't want to talk about this, we are moving on. Alright, before I continue into potentially more headaches, I want to get some easy runes, and more importantly, some easy wins. Let's see how the Apostle in Windmill Village goes. And the answer is mostly fine, other than me being really bad at timing the Golden Retaliation skill. Oh, and while I'm delaying the inevitable, I should probably pick up the Ritual Shield Talisman. The reduced damage at high health is very nice to have, and it's about time to drop Radigan's Soreseal. That extra damage taken just isn't worth it anymore. Alright, Morgott, what you got for me? The Erdtree Shield does a lot to reduce the damage I take from random holy spells, but Morgott really does love to flip. However, Determination boosted attacks deal real big damage. That fight was actually quite easy, a pleasant surprise for once. Morgott's down, so it's time for the mountaintops. But it's also time to start putting a lot of points in endurance. I need the equip load for all my big items and to block as much as this build really requires me to do. Time to take the second big lift up the mountaintops. Here I can pick up the next bell bearing for even more smithing stones. Then another bell bearing and a sacred tier, and that gets my greatsword up to plus 19. And I could use another win, so I'm gonna take on Vike. Last time I tried this, it didn't go super great. Thanks to the power of Big Shield though, it mostly goes okay. Vike is aggressive enough that it can be a bit difficult to find space to recast Scholar Shield, but my big sword definitely deals big hits. Then grab another Sacred Tier and the Church of Repose, and over to the Grace Fire before Fire Giant. And no, I am not about to hop into the Fire Giant fight and die. Rather, I have a bunch of errands I want to do first. First, kill a Tibia Mariner for some runes, then onwards to face this Magma Worm. The fight is mostly tedious, as the worm keeps spinning and running all over the place. Once it stops doing that, the fight is pretty easy. Then to kill Maggie for some more runes. For some reason, what am I actually doing here? Am I just climbing Mount Gelmir? I guess it's time to do Volcano Manor. Again, this area is fully optional, and I don't actually think there is anything here I want. Maybe it's just for the souls? Oh, I guess I also get some nice armor sets from the assassination missions. And then climb the Divine Tower of Caelid. Main goal here is to activate Radahn's Great Rune, but since I'm here anyway, I might as well kill the Apostle to get some easy runes. It does end up being harder than it should be, but that's mostly because I decided it'd be fun to try casting Scholar Shield like 5 times in a row while the Apostle throws fire at me. Not the best strategy. Second attempt actually works out because I decide to not play like a moron. Then it's time to kill the Erdtree Avatar in the Snowfield. It has no rot, so it's much easier than the ones in Caelid. It does summon a duplicate, but by the time the double comes out, it's already dead. Thank you, Flaming Big Sword. You never disappoint me. Except the many times you do. Then I kill Wormface, who is also weak to fire. This fight is very easy as ever, and I'm now certain I'm just killing all these enemies for runes, because I'm sure there is nothing in this area I could ever want. And over to X-Ikes, who is as weak to fire as they are full of rot, which is just a lot of rot. But then my big sword has a lot of fire. And then to the Swamp of Aeonia to face Commander O'Neill. Again, pretty sure I'm just getting runes to level up because this doesn't advance any of the quests I care about. And no, I'm not actually going to fight the Fire Giant yet, because I don't want to. Instead, it's time to head back into the Lanedale sewers to actually fight Mohg. I've calmed down after the Esgar incident, and surely facing sewer Mohg won't be too difficult. And this fight can be pretty tricky. Mohg doesn't have the phase 2 he has in the Blood Zone, but he is still pretty strong, and he has good range on his attacks. And, of course, a whole bunch of Blood Flame. It doesn't help that I don't usually fight Mohg, so I'm pretty out of practice. Oh, my other Great Shield has a better fire resistance than the Erdtree Shield? That makes sense. And I forgot to change the Ash of War again. I guess I'm just too used to my spell runs where Ashes of War aren't a thing. And I know Scholar Shield is already bonkers strong, but I do wish it had a longer duration. You know, now that I think about it, Mohg resists fire, doesn't he? I should probably switch this affinity then. Huh. Yeah, that's a little bit better. And yeah, that's really all I need to beat this boss. Okay, yeah, I'm way less mad than I was after fighting Esgar. Now it's time to do the drop down to the fingerprint shield, which I actually just googled the best way to drop down this area rather than suffering through it, just dropping wildly, because I've died here so many times, I simply don't want to go through that again. And here it is, the biggest, chunkiest shield in the game, the fingerprint shield. And while it provides less of a bonus with Scholar Shield, it can benefit from Scholar Shield, which means my defenses are not messing around. Not that they really were before, but you know what I mean. And it's time for Fire Giant. Though actually, what if I delayed even more? Let's do some Volcano Manor, and that starts with Godskin Noble. I'm probably over-leveled for this point in the game, but even if I were not, the Fingerprint Shield is very strong. And the Scholar Shield spell makes that even more pronounced, and Big Sword deals quite good damage. So this fight is pretty easy, despite me not actually playing very well. It is good practice for the duo fight coming up shortly, so it's definitely worth it. But what I'm actually here for is... I don't have any Stone Sword keys. Hold, please! And we're back. Here I can drop down the cages to the area below, get grabbed. Wait, no, I didn't want to do that. I mean, to grab this, Royal Knight's Resolve, which is just determination, but better. Totally optional, but I may as well take some time to take out Rykard. My first attempt goes badly, because I get stuck on the snake, but then come back in on the second try and see it through. With enough FP and timing, Rykard is basically free when you can actually use the Serpent Hunter. And one last thing before I head into the Fire Giant. I need to head back to Limgrave Castle to get the whetstone here so I can make my big sword heavy affinity. Because, shockingly, the Fire Giant also resists fire. And my strength is very high, but my dex is... fine. Alright, let's hop in. And the Fire Giant fight is always an interesting experience. As I've played this more and more, I think this may actually be my least favorite boss in the game. I think Phase 1 is fine. Dodging and weaving around his swingy attacks and various fireballs is actually mostly fine. It's Phase 2 that really loses me. He no longer has a weak spot that is always accessible, meaning you can only meaningfully attack his hands, but those are only in range on very specific attacks, and the addition of 2 Fire Breath attacks that are, frankly, both nonsense, means it kinda sucks. And Big Sword isn't really gonna do it here. Finding the space to actually attack the hands is something I'm not good at and isn't particularly fun, so time to get a Bandit Knife. This has innate bleed, and I can then infuse it with a cold affinity to add even more status buildup. And that attempt doesn't go great, but Glintblade Phalanx did manage to knock him down, so I think that's probably going to be the way forward. And yeah, the next attempt is actually the victory attempt. So, only 3 tries, though I did rely on Status Procs and Glintblade Phalanx, both of which are very strong in this game. And that's another boss down. Time to head into Farum Azula and the endgame. And the run through Farum Azula is pretty uneventful. This area can look intimidating, but once you know your way through, it actually doesn't take very long to just sprint past enemies, and to the grace outside the first boss. But first, it's time to kill this bell-bearing hunter to get the Bone Peddler bell-bearing, then over to this merchant in Raya Lucaria to buy this recipe book. Because the Godskin nobles can be fairly difficult and easily overwhelm you, but they are both vulnerable to sleep. And that should have been enough to make this a one-attempt boss, but it's not. I get pretty sloppy in applying sleep and actually wake up the noble, which is a problem, because every time you apply a status, the boss's resistance increases. So while I'm able to kill the apostle once, I then mess up and die. Second attempt, I fail to apply sleep immediately and get a bit overwhelmed. The third attempt goes fine though. And me managing to actually get the twins to go to sleep when I need them to, and use powerful charge attacks to bring down the awake one. It's so nice that this fight can actually be easy when you actually have access to sleep as a tool in your arsenal. That gives me the final bell bearing, which gets my greatsword up to plus 24. Now I just need a regular dragonstone to max it out. And with that, it's time for the second half of Farum Azula, which does take a bit longer than the first, mostly because dealing with a bunch of angry birds during a thunderstorm is actually a bit tricky. Seriously, birds, will you just not? Oh hey, I have sleep arrows. Then a very boring fight with a dragon, and that's a max smithing stone, which means it's time to head back to get my greatsword up to plus 25, and finally spend the money to upgrade the fingerprint shield to plus 24. Let's try it out on our old friend, Draconic Tree Sentinel. No torrent this time means I can't just run around cheesing the fight, but that's fine. It's not that difficult of a fight thanks to the big sword and the heftiest shield. That armor would be nice, but I'd need more equip load. How do I access the Arsenal Talisman? Nah, not worth it. That would be so far out of my way. Alright, let's just see how Malekith goes. I'm not too worried about Phase 1, but I am concerned about Phase 2. Alright, let's try that again. Second attempt goes way better and basically matches what I'd expected. Malekith uses basically only physical attacks, which I can either jump or block. And while I don't know his combos super well, they are pretty learnable. Phase 2 is where the real problem is. Malekith is very fast and has very devastating combos. His attacks also deal elemental damage, so they can't be fully blocked, and of course he has Black Flame, which is a whole other problem. Well, if Malekith wants to move fast, so can I, because I also have a dagger, and equally important, I have a dagger with Glintblade Phalanx. And being able to cast that and then run in to deal some damage, and more importantly deal a big chunk of poise damage, is all I need to take down Malekith. Tree is burned, Death Rune reclaimed, and it's Gideon time. My actual least favorite boss, probably. And while I do nearly manage to take him down on the first attempt, he manages to get away, heal, and then stomp me with magic. This fight is always so memed on because he has very little health and poise, but he can deal just so much damage so quickly with his spells. And all it takes is one obnoxious barrages of attacks to take you from full to 0. Gideon may be an insufferable jerk, but he does in fact know how to effectively cast magic. My ultimate strategy is basically run in, tank a hit or two to get a jump attack, and that is actually quite effective. Only a few bosses left, and the first is Hoaraloo. This fight starts more or less the same as Godfrey, but then in Phase 2, I encounter my biggest hurdle, grab attacks, which have been an ongoing struggle as they bypass my shield, but they are even more of a problem here because I really have trouble dodging the grabs in this fight at normal roll speed. The good news is that Phase 1 is basically free, so getting to Phase 2 is quick, and means I can get a lot of practice. And actually takes less time than I'd anticipated. As long as you are careful, his grab moves can actually be dodged pretty easily even in heavy equip load, and big sword guard counters do a lot of poise damage. Only 2 bosses left, and first up is Radagon. Good news is that Radagon is weak to fire, so my big sword does not mess around in this fight. While he does deal elemental damage, it's not that much damage. And nice! Radagon isn't going to be a nightmare this time. Elden Beast is going to be a little bit of a problem though. My big hits deal big damage, but Elden Beast is resistant to fire damage, more than physical damage at least, which sucks because I really need the fire damage to make sure the fight against Radagon goes smoothly to preserve my healing. But the actual problem is the combo attacks, which can be a bit tricky to dodge at the best of times, and these are not the best of times. But the good news is the Elden Beast is pretty easy to jump around, and they added the ability to ride Torrent in this arena in a patch. And on my third attempt, I realized that dodging the blade beams is actually just impossible at this equip load, but blocking them actually doesn't deal that much damage. And that was really the only combo I was worried about. I can dodge the rest by jumping around with Torrent, and that is the Elden Beast down. And that is it. Elden Ring beaten while always being in heavy equip load. That was a really interesting run. I always appreciate the suite of options this game gives, and there are a lot more I just couldn't be bothered to collect. And while it isn't always the right weapon, there is something very fun about the big sword. But I will have more to say about that in the summary video, out next week. I did want to shout out that I do have a Patreon, linked in the description. I spend a lot of time making these videos, so if you enjoyed the video, want to support the channel, and are financially stable enough to do so, that exists. No pressure though, this channel is free to enjoy for everyone and will remain that way. For now, if you liked the video, be sure to hit the like button. If you'd like to see more of this, feel free to subscribe. Hey, maybe leave a comment if you have something you'd like to say. But whatever you decide to do, have a safe trip home.